They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody tells you it takes 8 years in prison to get it that cold. I was 26 when they locked me up for a crime I didn't commit. Now I'm back, and the people who destroyed me, they have no idea I'm coming. They're about to learn that the biggest mistake you can make isn't committing a crime. It's framing someone with nothing left to lose. I still remember the sound of that cell door closing behind me for the last time. 8 years, 2 months, and 13 days. That's how long I spent behind bars for a crime I didn't commit. But here's the thing nobody tells you about prison. It doesn't just take your freedom. It takes your face, your identity, everything you thought you were. And when I walked out of there, I wasn't the same woman who'd been dragged in, screaming her innocence to a courtroom that had already made up its mind. The first thing I did when I got out was look in a mirror. Really look. The reflection staring back at me was a stranger. My eyes had this hardness to them now, like frozen steel. My smile, if you could even call it that anymore, didn't reach anywhere near those eyes. Prison had carved away the softness, the naivety, the girl who used to believe that truth and justice were the same thing. They're not, by the way. Not even close. I was 26 when they arrested me, fresh out of grad school, working as a junior accountant at Henderson & Meyer, one of the most prestigious firms in Charleston. I had my whole life mapped out, you know? Career, marriage, kids, the white picket fence, all that American dream stuff. Then one Tuesday morning, the FBI showed up at my apartment with a warrant and enough evidence to bury me 6 feet under. They said I'd been embezzling funds from client accounts. Millions of dollars, allegedly funneled through offshore accounts in my name. The betrayal wasn't just that I was accused. It was that the evidence was so damn convincing. My trial was a circus. The media ate it up. Young woman's greed destroys lives. That was my favorite headline. Not. My face was plastered on every news channel, every paper, every gossip blog. They found bank statements, digital trails, forged signatures, all pointing directly to me. My lawyer, this overworked public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, told me to take a plea deal. 5 years instead of 20, he said. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Because I didn't do it. So I fought. And I lost. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 3 hours to decide that my entire life was worth throwing away. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, I felt something inside me snap. Not break, exactly. More like transform. The prosecutor actually smiled when they led me away in handcuffs. That smile haunted me for years. Prison is a masterclass in survival. You either learn fast or you don't make it. I learned. I watched women who'd been broken by the system, who'd lost themselves in the violence and the monotony. I promised myself that wouldn't be me. Instead, I studied. I read every legal book in that prison library. I worked out until my body was stronger than it had ever been. I made connections with women who taught me things they don't cover in business school. How to read people, how to spot a lie, how to play chess when everyone else is playing checkers. But mostly, I plotted. Because here's what I figured out during those endless nights in my cell. Someone had set me up. Someone had meticulously crafted this golpe against me, and they'd done it so perfectly that even I had moments of doubt. Who could have pulled off something so elaborate? Who had the access, the know-how, the motivation? I made lists. I drew diagrams on notebook paper that I had to hide during inspections. I replayed every meeting, every interaction from my time at the firm. My family stopped visiting after the first year. My mom couldn't handle seeing me in orange. She said. My dad wrote me one letter telling me I'd broken his heart, and that was it. Radio silence. My younger sister, Katie, the one I'd helped put through college, blocked my number. Friends vanished like smoke. The few who initially stood by me eventually drifted away, worn down by the social stigma of associating with a convicted felon. That's when I learned the most valuable lesson of all. Loyalty is a myth. People will abandon you the second it becomes inconvenient to stand by your side. There was one person, though. Just one. My cellmate for the last 3 years. A woman named Rosa, who was in for armed robbery. Rosa didn't judge. She'd been set up too, by an ex-boyfriend who'd convinced her to drive a getaway car without telling her it was for a bank job. We bonded over our shared experience of Treso. She taught me Spanish, how to braid hair into intricate patterns, and most importantly, how to stop being a victim. You can't change the past, she'd say in her thick accent, but you can become the villain in someone else's future. I liked that philosophy. The vindication I'd hoped for never came while I was inside. No surprise evidence, no last-minute confession, no dramatic exoneration. Just day after day of the same routine until suddenly my sentence was up. Time served, with good behavior. They processed me out on a gray Thursday morning, handed me $200 and a bus ticket, and basically said, good luck out there. But here's what they didn't know. I didn't need luck anymore. I needed strategy, and I'd had 8 years to plan my venganza. The bus ride back to Charleston took 6 hours. 6 hours to mentally prepare for what came next. I'd changed my appearance as much as I could within legal limits. Dropped 30 pounds of bulk and put on lean muscle. Dyed my hair from blonde to dark brown. got contacts to change my eye color from blue to hazel, started wearing completely different styles of clothing. Professional, sharp, nothing like the casual, friendly girl I used to be. I wasn't trying to hide exactly. I was trying to become someone new. Someone who could walk into a room and not be immediately recognized as that woman who'd supposedly stolen millions. My first stop wasn't home. I didn't have a home anymore. My apartment had been seized, my belongings sold to pay restitution for money I never took. Instead, I went to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where they don't ask questions if you pay, in cash. I needed time to observe, to understand how much had changed in 8 years. Social media made that easier. From my burner phone, I created fake profiles and started following everyone from my old life, and oh, how they'd all moved on. My former best friend, Jennifer, was married now. Big wedding at some plantation venue, all over Instagram. She'd been my maid of honor before my trial, ghosted me the day after the verdict. My ex-boyfriend, Marcus, the one who'd promised to wait for me, had gotten engaged within 6 months of my conviction. They had a kid now, cute little boy who looked just like him. Looking at those photos felt like swallowing glass. But the most interesting discovery was about my old boss, Richard Henderson, the founding partner of the firm, the man who'd testified against me at trial with tears in his eyes, talking about how betrayed he felt by my criminal activities. Richard Henderson was now a pillar of the Charleston community. He'd written a book about business ethics. Business ethics. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. He gave speeches. He sat on charity boards. The mayor had given him some kind of citizen achievement award. Richard Henderson was a hero, and I was the villain who'd almost destroyed his precious firm. Except, as I dug deeper, scrolling through articles and press releases, something started clicking into place. The firm had been struggling before my arrest. I remembered that. We'd lost 2 major clients in the months leading up to my supposed embezzlement. There'd been whispers about cash flow problems. Then suddenly, after my conviction, everything turned around. New clients, major expansions. They'd opened offices in 3 new cities. How does a firm that's supposedly been devastated by employee theft suddenly flourish? Insurance money, maybe? Settlements? Or something else? I spent a week doing nothing but research. The motel room became my war room, with papers spread across the bed, timelines on the walls. I used my old forensic accounting skills, the ones that had made me good at my job in the first place, to trace financial records that were publicly available, corporate filings, tax documents, investor reports. And slowly, painfully slowly, a pattern emerged. The offshore accounts that had been used to frame me, they'd been created months before I even joined the firm. The signatures that were supposedly mine, done by someone who'd had access to my personnel file, with examples of my actual signature. The timing of the transfers, they corresponded with periods when I'd been out of the office on client visits, visits that Richard himself had sent me on, visits that now seemed designed to give me alibis in reverse, to make it look like I was covering my tracks by being away when the crimes occurred. Richard Henderson hadn't just testified against me, he'd orchestrated the entire Gulfie. He'd used me as his patsy, his escape route when his own financial mismanagement and likely legitimate embezzlement had threatened to sink the firm. By pinning it all on me, he'd gotten insurance payouts, sympathy from clients, and a clean slate to rebuild. I was the sacrificial lamb that saved his empire. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I actually threw up. Everything I'd lost, my freedom, my family, my entire life, had been stolen by a man who then turned around and profited from my destruction. The traição wasn't just criminal. It was calculated, cold, and complete. And he'd gotten away with it because he was smart enough to know that no one would believe a junior accountant over a respected firm partner. But now I had 8 years of prison education behind me. I knew how to be patient. I knew how to plan. And I knew something Richard Henderson didn't know. I was coming for him. First, I needed an identity that would let me get close. I couldn't exactly walk into his office as myself, so I created a new persona, Valerie Blackwood, independent financial consultant specializing in fraud detection and prevention. I built a website, created a professional portfolio using publicly available case studies, and established a LinkedIn profile with recommendations from former clients that I'd carefully fabricated. It wasn't illegal. Technically, Valerie Blackwood was me, just using a professional name. Consultants do it all the time. Then I started networking. Charleston's business community is surprisingly small once you crack into it. Everyone knows everyone. I attended Chamber of Commerce events, financial symposiums, charity fundraisers. I made sure to be seen, to be remembered, but never in a way that would trigger recognition. I was polished, professional, cold, even. Nothing like the warm, eager-to-please girl I'd been before prison. People responded to confidence, I'd learned. They trusted you more when you acted like you didn't need their approval. It took 3 months before I engineered my first accidental encounter with Richard. It was at a fundraiser for a local children's hospital. He was there with his wife, a petite blonde who wore her wealth like armor. I watched him work the room, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, playing the role of benevolent community leader. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put down my wine glass. "Mr. Henderson?" I approached with a professional smile. "Valerie Blackwood. I've heard so much about your work in business ethics. I'm actually writing a paper on corporate fraud prevention, and I'd love to get your perspective sometime." He looked at me with those same blue eyes that had stared at me across the courtroom, showing mock sympathy as he'd helped destroy my life. No recognition. None. Just professional interest and a hint of male appreciation. I'd learned to weaponize my appearance, and I wasn't above using every tool at my disposal. "Always happy to help someone in the field," he said, handing me his business card. "Call my office. We'll set something up." It was that easy. That's how confident he was that he'd gotten away with it. He looked at me and saw nothing but an attractive consultant who admired his work. The girl he'd framed was buried so deep in his past that she was invisible. Our first official meeting was in his office, the same office where I'd sat 8 years ago as the FBI informed him they were arresting his employee, the same desk where he'd probably planned my entire downfall. Walking back into that building felt surreal, like stepping into a nightmare wearing different skin, but I kept my face neutral, my demeanor professional. I asked him questions about his expertise in identifying fraud, taking notes, nodding along as he spouted advice he clearly didn't follow himself. "The key," he said, leaning back in his expensive leather chair, "is to build a culture of transparency. When everyone knows they're being watched, they're less likely to try anything dishonest." I wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. Instead, I smiled and said, "Fascinating. And you've never had issues with internal fraud since that incident years ago? The one with the accountant?" His expression flickered. Just for a second. "No. We learned our lesson. Implemented much stronger controls. That situation was unfortunate. The girl seemed so promising." The girl. He didn't even use my name. I'd been reduced to a cautionary tale in his personal legend. It must have been devastating. I pressed gently. To be betrayed like that by someone you trusted. It was, he agreed. But sometimes people aren't who we think they are. You learn to spot the red flags. Red flags. Coming from him. The irony was suffocating. I left that meeting with exactly what I needed. Confirmation that he felt safe. He thought the past was buried. He thought I was just another admirer of his professional redemption story. That false sense of security was going to be his undoing. Over the next 4 months, I became a regular presence in his professional orbit. I volunteered for committees he chaired. I attended events where I knew he'd be. I built a relationship based on professional respect and subtle flattery. He started introducing me to his inner circle, his business partners, his investors, his friends. I smiled and shook hands with all of them, memorizing names, faces, connections, building a mental map of everyone who'd benefited from my fall. Meanwhile, I was working a parallel track. I'd reconnected with Rosa. She'd gotten out 6 months before me, and she'd introduced me to some people with very specific skills. A hacker who could access things that were supposed to be deleted, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes, a lawyer who worked in legal gray areas but had never lost a case. I paid them with money I'd saved from 3 jobs I worked simultaneously, waitressing, cleaning offices at night, and doing freelance bookkeeping under the table. Every dollar was an investment in my vindication. And slowly, piece by piece, we built the case that should have been built 8 years ago. We found the original accounts that Richard had created. We traced money that had gone from the firm to his personal holdings through layers of shell companies. We found emails he thought he'd deleted, messages that showed he'd been planning to use me as his fall guy months before the discovery of the embezzlement. We even found the person he'd paid to forge my signatures, a graphic designer who'd done freelance work for the firm, and then conveniently moved to another state right after my trial. The designer was willing to talk, it turned out. She'd been young, naive, told it was just for internal documents. She'd had no idea it would be used to send someone to prison. When my PI found her, she broke down crying and signed an affidavit. That was my first major piece of evidence, but I didn't want just vindication. I wanted vindication with an audience. I wanted everyone who'd turned their backs on me, everyone who'd believed the lies, everyone who'd benefited from my destruction to see the truth in real time, which meant I needed the perfect stage. That opportunity came in the form of the Charleston Business Excellence Awards, an annual black tie gala where the city's business elite gathered to congratulate themselves. And guess who was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award that year? Richard Henderson, for his contributions to ethical business, practices, and community leadership. I used every connection I'd built to get myself invited as a guest of one of the sponsors. I bought a dress that cost more than my monthly motel rent. Deep emerald green, elegant, severe. I had my hair professionally styled. I looked like money, like success, like someone who belonged in that room, not like an ex-convict with a vendetta. That was the point. The event was at the historic Grand Hall downtown. Crystal chandeliers, orchestra music, tables draped in white linen. Charleston's finest, dressed in their finest. I recognized faces from my trial in the crowd, reporters who'd written scathing articles, business associates who'd testified about my suspicious behavior, even the prosecutor who'd painted me as a greedy criminal willing to destroy innocent people for money. They were all there, champagne in hand, celebrating their world. Richard was at the head table, his wife beside him, basking in the attention. He gave a speech about integrity and redemption and second chances. The irony was almost too much. People applauded. Some actually had tears in their eyes. He was their hero, proof that good people could survive being victimized by bad employees. I waited until after dinner, until the awards had been presented, until Richard had his gleaming plaque in hand, and everyone was mingling during the reception. Then I made my move. I'd arranged for the AV system to be accessible. Money talks, especially to underpaid venue staff. When I approached the tech booth, the operator I'd paid was waiting. I handed him the USB drive and nodded. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice coming through the sound system. The room went quiet. People turned to look at me, confused. Richard's head snapped up, his eyes finding me across the room. Still no recognition, just annoyance that someone was interrupting his evening. "I apologize for the interruption," I continued, walking toward the center of the room. All eyes on me, just like old times. "But I think there's something you all need to see before you celebrate tonight's honoree." The screens that had been showing highlight reels of Richard's career flickered. Then a new image appeared. Bank records, transfer receipts, emails with Richard's name clearly visible, a timeline showing the creation of offshore accounts months before my hire date, the forged signatures side by side with my real ones, showing clear differences, affidavits from the graphic designer, testimony from a forensic accountant I'd hired to analyze the evidence. 8 years ago, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I was convicted of embezzling millions of dollars from Henderson and Meyer. I lost everything, my career, my family, my freedom. I spent 8 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. The room was dead silent. Richard had gone pale. His wife was staring at him with growing horror. "The man you're honoring tonight isn't a victim of fraud. He's the architect of it. Richard. Henderson embezzled from his own firm, and when he was about to get caught, he manufactured evidence to frame me. A junior accountant with no connections, and no power to fight back. The perfect patsy." I walked closer to the head table. Richard stood up, but he didn't speak. What could he say? The evidence was on every screen in the room, in every guest's eyeline. "The offshore accounts were created before I even worked there," I continued. "The signatures were forged by a designer he hired and paid off. The transfers happened when I was out of the office on trips he personally assigned me. Every piece of evidence that convicted me was manufactured by him. And then he used my conviction to get insurance payouts, to gain sympathy, to rebuild his reputation as some kind of ethical business leader. People were pulling out their phones, recording, taking photos of the screens. The reporters in the room looked like sharks smelling blood. This was bigger than my original trial. This was a pillar of the community being exposed as a fraud. The real betrayal," I said, and my voice cracked just slightly. "I didn't plan that, but it was effective. Wasn't just that he destroyed my life, it's that he profited from it. He wrote a book about ethics. He gave speeches about integrity. He became a hero, all while the woman he framed was locked in a cell, abandoned by everyone who claimed to care about her." Richard finally found his voice. "This is insane. This woman, whoever she is clearly disturbed. These documents are fabricated. I don't know what kind of scam she's trying to pull, but my name," I interrupted, "is actually not Valerie Blackwood. That's just the name I've been using to get close to you, to study you, to gather evidence while you were too arrogant to even recognize me." I turned to face him fully, letting him really look at me for the first time, letting him see past the new hair, the new body, the new confidence, letting him see the girl he'd destroyed, now reborn as his worst nightmare. "My real name is Rebecca Chen, and you sent me to prison for 8 years. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went from pale to ashen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Around us, the room erupted in noise. Gasps, exclamations, the click of cameras. His wife stood up and stepped away from him, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. Poetic. Security was moving toward me, but I didn't care. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd shown what I needed to show. The rest would unfold on its own. "All of this evidence," I said, raising my voice over the chaos, "has been submitted to the FBI, the state attorney general, and every major news outlet in the state. My lawyers are filing for my exoneration and for charges against Mr. Henderson. The truth is out now, finally." As security reached me, I looked at Richard one last time. He was still frozen, his Lifetime Achievement Award clutched in his hand like a lifeline. He looked small suddenly, powerless, exposed. "You took 8 years of my life," I said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "I'm going to take everything." They escorted me out of the hall, but gently. No one was quite sure what was happening, whether I was actually the victim or the villain of this story. But I didn't resist. I'd done what I came to do. The rest was just paperwork and press conferences. The next 72 hours were insane. My story went national. Woman falsely imprisoned. Exposes former boss. Was trending on every platform. The evidence I'd presented was being analyzed by legal experts on TV. The Charleston prosecutor's office announced they were reopening my case. Richard Henderson was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. His firm's stock tanked. Partners started resigning. That book deal he had for a sequel? Canceled. My court-appointed exoneration hearing happened faster than anyone expected. With the evidence I'd gathered, there wasn't much to debate. The judge who'd originally sentenced me, now much older, near retirement, actually apologized from the bench. The prosecutors who'd built the case against me held a press conference admitting they'd been deceived by Henderson's manufactured evidence. My conviction was vacated. My record expunged. Just like that, legally speaking, I was innocent again. But here's the thing about vindication. It doesn't erase the years you lost. It doesn't bring back the relationships that were destroyed. My dad had died while I was in prison. Heart attack. 3 years into my sentence. I'd missed his funeral. My sister Katie reached out after the news broke, crying, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. I listened to her voicemail 3 times before deleting it. Some betrayals run too deep, you know? Some vindication comes too late. Marcus, my ex, sent a message through social media saying he was sorry for not believing in me, and that he'd always wondered. I blocked him without responding. If he'd always wondered, he could have visited. He could have written. He chose comfort over truth, and that's something I can't forget. But not everyone had abandoned me completely. Jennifer, my old best friend, showed up at my lawyer's office 2 weeks after the gala. She looked different, older, worn down, guilty. She told me she'd wanted to believe me, wanted to stand by me, but her family had pressured her, said it would ruin her own career to associate with a convicted felon. She cried. She apologized. She asked if we could ever be friends again. I thought about it for a long moment. About Rosa's words, "You can become the villain in someone else's future." About whether I wanted to carry all this anger forever. "Maybe someday," I told her, "but not today. I need time." She nodded understanding and left. Whether someday ever comes, I don't know, but at least I left the door open. That felt like growth. Richard's trial happened 6 months after my exoneration. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching him squirm on the witness stand, watching his lawyers try to spin a narrative that made no sense once you saw all the evidence, watching the jury deliberate for less time than mine had. They found him guilty on all counts. The judge gave him 15 years, more than I'd served, but still not enough. Nothing would ever be enough. When they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me, really looked at me, and I smiled. Not a cruel smile, just satisfied, like I'd completed a really difficult puzzle. He'd taken 8 years of my life, but I'd taken his entire legacy, his reputation, his freedom, his hero status. In the end, my revenge was complete. The compensation lawsuit was still pending. You can sue for wrongful imprisonment in South Carolina, and my lawyer said I had a strong case against both the state and Henderson's firm. The money would be nice, sure, but honestly, it was never about the money. It was about standing in a courtroom and hearing someone say officially, "We were wrong. You were right. We're sorry." Those words meant everything. A year after the gala, I stood on the same street corner where I'd been arrested, same spot where news vans had filmed me being led away in handcuffs, where pedestrians had stopped to stare at the criminal. But this time, I was wearing a designer suit. My own consulting business was thriving. Turns out being the woman who exposed one of Charleston's biggest frauds makes you pretty attractive to companies worried about their own internal security. I'd moved into a penthouse apartment downtown, bought a car that cost more than my parents' first house. People recognized me now, but differently. They whispered, sure, but it was with respect, with awe, even. Some stopped me to take photos, to tell me I was an inspiration. A woman had even come up to me at a coffee shop to say my story had given her courage to report fraud at her own company. I'd become the hero of my own story. That's the part the news articles didn't cover. The trauma didn't just disappear because I was legally vindicated. I still had nightmares about prison. I still flinched when I heard certain sounds. I was in therapy twice a week, working through PTSD and trust issues and anger that sometimes felt bottomless. Rosa called me once a month to check in, to remind me that healing wasn't linear and that it was okay to not be okay sometimes. But I was free. Truly free. Not just legally, but emotionally. I'd walked through fire and come out stronger. The girl who went to prison was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that justice and truth aren't the same thing. But sometimes, if you fight hard enough, you can make them align. The city that had condemned me now had to live with its own shame. The people who'd turned their backs had to face the fact that they'd abandoned an innocent woman. The system that had failed me had to acknowledge its failure publicly. That wasn't just vindication. That was transformation. Sometimes people ask me if I regret spending 8 years planning my revenge instead of just trying to move on. If I think about what else I could have done with that time and energy. And honestly, no. Because that revenge, That careful, calculated, devastating exposure of the truth. That was my survival. That was what kept me sane in prison. That was what transformed me from victim to victor. Richard Henderson took 8 years of my life, but in trying to destroy me, he accidentally created his own downfall. He made me into someone strong enough, smart enough, and angry enough to take him down. That's the funny thing about betrayal. Sometimes it doesn't break you. Sometimes it just shows you exactly who you need to become. And I became someone he should have been terrified of all along. So that's my story. 8 years stolen, but a lifetime gained in understanding what I'm truly capable of. Some people might say I should have just moved on, let it go, been the bigger person. But you know what? Those people have never been stripped of everything they loved by someone else's calculated lies. Thank you for sticking with me through this whole crazy journey. It means more than you know. Now I want to hear from you. If someone took years of your life for something you didn't do, what would you do when you got out? Would you seek revenge or just try to rebuild? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and unfiltered, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's making sure everyone knows you won.